Sometimes it can just feel like the news is filled with all this inane chatter about people doing their jobs and companies doing the things that they're supposed to do. It just feels like a slow news week when you're just sitting there whiling away the hours, whittling spoons, whatever you do in your spare time. And then sometimes you have really busy news weeks where it feels like somebody is just standing in front of you, slapping you in the face with news as it constantly updates with something new that's happening. Is this week going to be one of those weeks? Well, it's a possibility. Hi, I'm Rob, and welcome to Gossip News. So, what did actually happen last week? Well, we're going to kick off with a report from Axios. Now, Axios have done some really good reporting in the past, and this time is no exception. Nintendo have apparently been hit with a labour complaint. Now, this might not seem like a big deal at first, but I can assure you this is the kind of thing that really gets out of hand very, very quickly. See, an unnamed worker is alleging that Nintendo and a firm it uses for hiring contractors violated their legally protected right to unionize according to a new filing by the National Labor Relations Board in America, who claim that Nintendo and this other company have violated the National Labor Relations Act. The allegations state that Nintendo of America and global hiring firm Aston Carter engaged in concerted activities and made coercive actions against a worker interfering with their legally protected right to organize. The exact claims of what happened are still unclear because the publicly posted docket for the complaint lists a broad set of charges but doesn't describe them in detail. What it does do, though, is indicate the allegations were likely to include claims of surveillance, threats, retaliation, and either a layoff or refusal to hire. Now, this claim comes at a time when unionization within video games is basically one of the watchwords I called for 2022. I said there was going to be a lot of news about unions in video games, and I, for one, am an advocate of unions within video games because there is a lot of exploitation in video games. There are a lot of people who are clearly being exploited. Nintendo are severely guilty of being at the forefront of this, and this has happened for years. And yet people turn a blind eye to this because they're a Mario fan, or they're a Zelda fan, or they don't want to delay their next Super Smash Bros. Game, or whatever it is. People do not hold these companies to account. And when I say people, I mean you who play the video games. You have the audacity to say, hey, Konami bad because they did all this to Kojima. But you don't say Nintendo bad because they do this to all these no-name developers who don't have the status of Kojima and aren't able to protect themselves by going to the press. It's kind of hypocritical that on one hand, you would call a company bad because they fired somebody who's a name within video games, but all those people who were basically just grunts, where's their support? Anyway, Kotaku have done some follow-up reporting based on this. They've reached out to various people, including Nintendo, to try and fill in the blanks and to try and get more clarification where they can. I'm going to link it in the description below because it does kind of expand on various aspects and give some context to certain things that are in the original Axios report. Now, obviously, we do have to play devil's advocate a little bit. We don't know what the truth is yet. These are allegations. We will wait to see what happens with all of these judgments and everything like that. But if all of this turns out to be true, then Nintendo are guilty of not just exploitation, but also union busting, two things that a lot of people have been vocal about within the video games community, and two things that companies should be called out on. Speaking of which, there was one other company that was guilty of union busting, or attempts at it, and that was Activision Blizzard. Now, Activision Blizzard recently took on a lot of QA staff from across their company. They made them all full-time employees instead of being contracted workers, except for the group that's at Raven Software, who were the first group who tried to unionize within Activision Blizzard as a whole and tried to fight for their rights as employees. Activision Blizzard is trying to put pressure on these employees to basically give up their attempts at unionization by dividing and conquering, effectively. And what they said was that they would only recognize a union if all of the employees at Raven Software decided to vote for a union. This was the case that they made to the National Labour Relations Board, who ruled on Friday against Activision Blizzard. It means that the 21-person unit of QA workers at Raven Software, they can decide on whether to unionize or not. It does not require all 230 staff at Raven Software. All of the eligible Raven Software QA workers will be mailed ballots on April the 29th, and the ballots will be counted on May the 23rd. Should a supermajority of eligible workers vote yes, their union, called Game Workers Alliance, will move into contract negotiations with Activision Blizzard. This is the thing that Activision Blizzard has been most scared of, because when you have a body like the NLRB, the National Labour Relations Board, involved in these negotiations, which they probably will be, and then you've got the Communication Workers of America involved in this as well, who I think are the parent union for this Game Workers Alliance. That's a lot of power that Activision Blizzard will have to negotiate against. And that's the power on the side of the workers. And I really do hope that this vote goes through, that the QA workers at Raven Software are able to unionize, and that they drag Activision Blizzard, kicking and screaming, to the negotiation table, and that this encourages other parts of Activision Blizzard to unionize, and thereby other workers within the video game sphere to unionize. Now, some of you out there are probably thinking, well, what's the benefits of unionization? Well, you can't force someone to crunch for a start. They have to be paid a fair wage for the work that they do. They're legally entitled to holiday pay and sick pay and stuff like that. After they've worked at the company for a certain number of months, they need to be taken on as full-time employees, unlike what Nintendo have been doing, which is a copy of what Microsoft did when they lost a lawsuit. They basically just hired people on for like 9, 10, 11 months, then gave them like a 2-month break, which forced a lot of them to quit and not come back. That's what Nintendo have been doing. Now you see why contract work is such a big thing in video games. There's a lot of murky, dark shit involved with working in video games at the contractual level. And yet they're the ones who do all the work. Anyway, let's talk about Netflix. Netflix have been doing not so good. They lost a lot of their share price recently, and according to an article in the Washington Post, they have been betting big on video games. Now, they announced their intentions last July, and they've hired multiple executives to significant positions, and they've even got a few developers under their belt over the past year. Now, what they're looking at is more content opportunities around video games from pretty much every direction. They really want to push this idea that they can basically be the streaming platform for video games. They've got some tough competition because Microsoft is already in that space, Sony is already in that space, Amazon is heading into that space. Microsoft have got a Fire Stick-esque type idea going, and that's in the background. That Microsoft Fire Stick and that deal that they made, was it last year or the year before, with the TV company to develop a streaming service for Microsoft, Game Pass built into your TV or on a stick that you just plug in so you no longer need a console. That is scaring the crap out of Sony and Nintendo. That's what Sony and Nintendo are up against. So anyone who says Microsoft is plodding away in the background, you forgot about those bits, didn't you? And that's what Netflix and Amazon are worried about as well. That's why they're trying to get heavily into the video game streaming services. But to do that, they need their own developers on board. Amazon have a few, Netflix are lagging behind. But they do have the money to catch up, even though their stock lost more than a third of its value. Another company that's worried about their share price is Ubisoft. Their stock jumped by 11% amid fresh takeover reports. Now, the original article, which was in Bloomberg, names a few private equity firms like Blackstone Inc. and KKR & Co., who have been looking at Ubisoft as a potential purchase for a while now. That said, Ubisoft haven't actually entered into any serious negotiations with potential acquirers, and it was only back in February, during an earnings call, when investors asked if Ubisoft was a potential for being bought. On one hand, Ubisoft wants to remain independent and free and doing their own thing, which is more of the same thing, because it's Ubisoft. They make one game formula stretch as far as it can, which, in the broadest sense, is very economical in terms of how you make games. But it also lacks all of the imagination and creativity and fun. That's Ubisoft in a nutshell. They're basically saying, we're open to being bought, but we want to remain independent. I am really curious to see whether Ubisoft will actually be bought by anyone and who will actually buy them. Anyway, it's a little known fact that Sony are just as guilty as every other video game company, publisher or developer, or console manufacturer, of copying off somebody else. And this is one of those situations where they've gone, oh, that company's doing that, maybe we should do that too. Microsoft announced last week that they were investigating ways of putting adverts into free-to-play games. Now, these adverts would take the form of billboards and things like that, kind of on the level of product placement in TV shows and movies. So things that wouldn't pop up and would be unobtrusive, but would still be there. Think of the Obama billboards that were in Burnout Paradise and things like that. Stuff that was there. If you saw it, great. If you didn't, don't worry. That sort of thing. Sony are looking at that now as a thing that they want to add to their free-to-play games, because a good idea shouldn't be limited to just one company. It's a similar program to what Microsoft have decided on and are investigating. I have seen a lot of backlash to this, and there's loads of people, commentators in video games, streamers and YouTubers going, we don't want adverts in our video games. Well, so what? Boo bloody who? Get used to it. Having in-game adverts, things like billboards, things that are in magazines or things that are just there. These sorts of adverts already exist. In F1 and other racing games, you'll have cars plastered with all sorts of adverts for different companies, and those are all real companies. In games like FIFA or Madden or something like that, you'll have adverts for all of these companies. That's something that could be incorporated into free-to-play games, but will probably appear in full-price games at some point very, very soon. Here's the rub. If you have adverts in-game, if you have product placement in-game, I would say that game does not need microtransactions or loot boxes or any of those mechanics, because they're already getting advertising revenue. I think they're a good thing because they rebalance the equation. But automatically you've got this knee-jerk reaction from people who watch and commentate on video games of how they don't want these things in their video games without thinking about the economics of all of it. If you're going to talk about this stuff, think about what you're saying. Speaking of economics, EVE Online, for the first time in 20 years, has increased the cost of playing EVE Online. In terms of dollars, it's going up from $15 a month to $20 a month. And a 3-month option will go from $39 for 3 months to $48 for 3 months. It's the first time in 20 years that CCP Games have issued an increase, and the increase is to account for years of inflation. Now, given the way the world is at the moment, with increased costs for gas, electricity, petrol, with the war in the Ukraine making a mess of everything, and with all sorts of other problems around the world, can you blame them for issuing a price increase? It's kind of necessary, and it's the first one in 20 years. That tells you how stable EVE is as a gaming platform. If you've never played it and you're into your science fiction stuff, it's worth a look. People do say it's like work, and it can feel like that at times, but I would contest that World of Warcraft and Lost Ark and other games of that ilk, where it's all about the grind and all about you have to do this, to do that, to do the other, because you want to be raiding or PvPing at the highest levels, and it's all big nuts, no quit, all go, macho, 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 rah, that sort of game. I would find that more like work, especially if I'm having to spend 12 to 14 hours a day just to try and keep up with everyone. Anyway, we're on our penultimate story, and it has to do with the second Sonic movie. See, the success of the second Sonic movie has led to some interesting things happening with some of the other Sega IPs. According to an article that appeared in Deadline, there is a Streets of Rage film in the works, and it is being produced by DJ2 Entertainment, who also produced the Sonic movie, and Escape Artists, and the game is going to be adapted and scripted by Derek Kolstad, who worked on John Wick. Now, if this all turns out to be real, and not a rumour, oh my god, am I going to watch Streets of Rage at the cinema, and I'm going to staple my eyelids open just so I can take in all of the glorious detail. A Streets of Rage in the style of John Wick, who wouldn't want that? And I know we've had some duffer adaptations of fighting games in the past, and we're looking at the likes of Tekken and Dead or Alive and stuff like that, because they were god-awful. I mean, at least Street Fighter, the movie, the original one with Jean-Claude Van Damme and Kylie Minogue, had Raul Julia as Bison. And finally, we're on to our last story. It Takes Two is getting a movie adaptation. This is one of the things that a lot of people kind of expected with a franchise that's suddenly become so well known. It's had such a meteoric rise and won so many awards. Obviously, it's on the radar for Hollywood to make an adaptation of a game that would appeal to such a broad audience. And that's where it gets weird. See, the game is being adapted by DJ2 Entertainment, and they're adapting It Takes Two for film and TV. The problem is that Dwayne Johnson, The Rock, and Danny Garcia's production company, 7 Bucks, is also jumping on board the project, along with Amazon Studios, and they're not really noted for doing family-friendly movies and TV shows. They're more of the action genre and things like that. So I, for one, am very curious how this is all going to work. And maybe that Dwayne Johnson is just a massive fan of It Takes Two as a game. Maybe it's a game he absolutely adores, and he wants to make sure it's done right and done true to the game. And if that's the case, fair play to him. Now, the spirit of the game will be supported by the fact that Joseph Fares and Oscar Wolantis will be serving as executive producers on the project. And given how outspoken Joseph Fares is, I would expect that to lead to some arguments on set, especially when it comes to the suits and the money men. Maybe there will be a lot of shouting matches between Joseph Fares and The Rock, but maybe they end up as the best friends. You never know. Stranger things have happened. I mean, look at the relationship between Kevin Hart and The Rock. Who thought a bromance like that would exist? Anyway, that's the end of this episode. Let me know what you think about all the stories we've covered today in the comments below. I will be back on the next episode of Gossip News or on an episode of Impossible Mission, whichever one comes first. Until then, thanks for watching.